So we're going to talk about what cross-site request forgery is, how common it is, and we're also going to look at a live example of actually performing a cross-site request forgery attack. So let's run over the kind of setup I have initially here. You can download these files from the course downloads if you want to follow along. But let's open up my database first of all and just take a look at the kind of data I have in here. I just have a users table with 2 users and whether this account is active. Now the page I have here has a form which will allow me to delete my account, which will essentially just set active to 0. But this could really be any action that a user would perform if they were authenticated. So this is what the form looks like. All it's doing is it's going through to delete.php. This is a very rough setup, but of course you may have routing, whatever. So it's going through, it has a post method. And if we go over to the delete.php file, you can see that we're just preparing a statement here with PDO and we're executing it, and we are passing in the user session. So that's stored just here as a kind of mock signing a user in. So we've got everything set up to delete an account. This is how you may normally do it. Let's go ahead and click the button and see what happens. So we've gone through to delete.php. That would obviously normally forward you back somewhere, sign the user out, whatever. But the point here is that active has been set to 0 for that authenticated user. Now you might be thinking, well, since this is behind a layer of authentication, no one else can possibly prompt a user to delete their own account. But that's actually not true. Now, obviously what an attacker could do is forward you to this URL. Because you would be signed into this website, you would see this button, but that's not going to force you to actually click on it. Now, what we want to do is take a user to this website here, and that could be by any means. It could be by the means of a link, it could be embedding it in an image source, it could be really anything. But the point is that's very easy to do. So let's take a look at this CSRF page. That's over in a new folder here called CSRF.php, and all this is doing is it's pulling in jQuery, and then with jQuery we're using the AJAX method to AJAX over to delete.php with a type of post. Now, as soon as any user who's authenticated on this website and logged in visits this page, this is going to send a request to this delete.php file, not this one, but the one we go through to, and it will delete their account. So let's take a look at the network tab, and we'll just pull this up. So you send a user over to this page, doesn't look like anything's happened. But if we click on the delete.php request, it's actually sent a request through. And what's actually happened now is that's 1 at the moment. When I refresh, it's set to 0. So this is a cross-site request forgery attack. And this is how it works. There's obviously different methods of doing this and different ways we can do this. We could also, if we were to have something like user.php delete equals true, then that may perform an action deleting a user's account. Either way, we need to protect against this in some way. So let's set active back to 1 for this user. And what we're going to do is we are going to implement cross-site request forgery protection over on this form. Inside of Bootstrap, we're actually going to be checking a token. We'll talk about more about that in a minute. And then on delete, what we're going to be doing is kind of mocking and making sure this page only accepts post requests. Now, it's really important to know that this is a very rough example of doing things. If you really want good cross-site request forgery protection, either pull in some package from somewhere or use a framework that implements cross-site request forgery protection, or a framework that uses something called middleware, which will allow you to do this a lot more elegantly. Either way, we'll look at a basic example of how we can fix this up within this very basic application structure, and then hopefully you'll understand more about how we actually protect against this. So let's start writing the code out for this now. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just put in a tiny bit of code here, which is very bad practice, just to only allow this page to be accessed by a post request. So you wouldn't normally do this. You'd have routing set up, which would allow this for you. But I'm just going to check inside of the server superglobal array request method, that key, and I'm going to check that that doesn't equal post. And then if it doesn't equal post, I'm just going to kill the page. And all that means is we can't go through to delete.php. Well, we can, but it's not actually done anything. It just kills the page. So that's the first step, protecting your roots. But you do that with some kind of routing system. Either way, we have that there now, which is one kind of level better than we already have. The next thing we want to do is for each request, generate a random token. Now you can do that in whichever way you want. I'm going to be using the kind of most secure way of doing this. There are many other ways to do this, but we're going to be generating a random token, putting it in a session value, and then we're going to be appending that to our form. If that token then matches, we'll allow the user to perform the action. And the point of this is that an attacker will never know that token because it's only available to the current user. So let's do this if that doesn't make too much sense. So over in bootstrap.php, which is loaded into both my delete and index file, that's really important to know, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set this all up. So we've already started sessions. You need to make sure sessions are started because we're going to be using the session superglobal array. And I'm going to do an if statement here again to check if the request type is post. Now this isn't foolproof. If you're doing things like put operations or delete operations, you may need to adjust this. But again, this is just a very basic example to demonstrate cross-site request forgery attacks. So we're checking if the request method is post. You could do like an in array here and have post, get, post, put, delete, whatever you wanted to. Now what we're going to do is we are going to, in fact, before we do this, down here, we're going to generate a random token. And we're going to store that within the session superglobal, and it's going to be underscore token. You can call this whatever you want. So now what we're going to do is use the OpenSSL random pseudo bytes function. And we're going to pass in the length. And then we're going to do a binary to hex on that. Now this is just one way of generating a random string. If you're working with PHP 7, you can also use the random bytes function. It's entirely up to you. So now that we've done that, let's just, I guess, kill the page here and look at that token that we've generated. So if we hit enter here, there's a token. It will change each request. That's really important to know. It doesn't have to change each request, but in this case, we can just do it every request. So if the request method is post, that means we now want to check the token. But where's this token actually coming from? Well, it comes in every form that we want to submit. That means that that token has to be checked for every form we submit. Therefore, the attacker thing we looked at earlier won't work because along with this, we'll have to generate and send a random token. It's going to be very hard to guess that. So what we're going to be doing here then is saying if not is set $_post token. So if the token isn't set, we don't want to allow this request to go through. Or if the token doesn't equal the token stored in the session. So all we're really doing is saying within a form, here's a token. When you submit this form, I need it to match that token that we generated here. And then we know it's the user that's actually using the website, physically using the website. They're the person that's going to have submitted it. Now, otherwise, we're going to kill the page and just say invalid cross-site request forgery token. You could do anything here, throw an exception, redirect a user, it really doesn't matter. But now what's going to happen is when we submit this form, so let's just refresh on here. When we submit this, we see invalid cross-site request forgery token. Why is that? Well, we haven't implemented the token into our form. And you'll want to do this for every form that you build, because obviously every form you build is susceptible to cross-site request forgery attacks, particularly if it's for things like deleting accounts or, ordering items from a shopping cart. It could be anything, but really it's great to just protect everything. So we put this inside of a hidden input field. The name is going to be token. Remember, that's what we're checking here. So post underscore token. And we are setting the value to session token. So before we check this, let's just run through it once more. The first thing that a user will hit or will be executed is all of this code and then this here. So obviously this won't apply for users sending a GET request to a page. They're just viewing a page, that doesn't matter. But here we're generating the token. After this, we then place the token into the form. When the user submits the form, we now have a post request, and we check that that token stored in here matches the one output on the form, and then we know it's that user submitting the form. So let's keep an eye on this active one, and we'll go ahead and, assuming I'm a legitimate user, I'm authenticated, I want to delete my account, and there we go. That looks like it will have deleted my account. There we go. However, we're going to try the same method we saw at the start of the video, hitting this page, sending over a request to delete.php, and we'll see that when we do this, it sends a request over, but we can see we get that invalid cross-site request forgery token response back. And even if we were to try and make up some random value here, it's going to be very unlikely that we actually have a match. Now, like I said, this is a very rough method of doing things. It doesn't cover all cases. It keeps you secure for post forms, but for any other operations, it doesn't. And also, it's very messy. So like I said, within a framework, you'll find that this is implemented a lot better. And even if it isn't, you'll have the resources to implement it in a much more elegant way. So that's how we do cross-site request forgery attacks and how we protect against them.